So good news is that Harpreet is also here. Harpreet Kaur I met as part of UN Business Human Rights Forums, where she was very kind to invite me, Safe in India, and we have been able to do some great discussions. Harpreet is a business human rights specialist. She is part of United Nations Business Human Rights. She's based in Bangkok in Thailand as in the regional office, and is doing very energetic intervention in the initiatives of UN in this space. So, for example, UN Business Human Rights is promoting human rights due diligence by large companies for their supply chains. This is a new tool that will be pushed in the next few years increasingly. So, Harpreet, my question to you is, how do you think this will help India, the country, and its industry in the global context? Or is it just a pain? And I'm just being honest, right? Because some business people sitting here will think, if not, they will say it, but it's a pain. So what is the value of this to people, to business, to India? What do you think?
Sure. Thanks, Sandeep. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to be very brief, but congratulations again to you and to your team for this report. I mean, unfortunately, situation has changed a little bit, but a lot more, I think we were all expecting, especially if, we've been following up this for years. But thank you for keeping these conversations ongoing. And I'm going to tell Garima she owes me one, because in her absence, I have to respond to this difficult question. Okay, I think, Sandeep, I think Viraf briefly mentioned and introduced the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. But really, what is HRDD? The human rights due diligence, as we say, is a process to identify, prevent, mitigate, and account for adverse human rights impacts. And, I'm going to be honest with you. I mean, human rights is a costly business. It is not, and it's for companies to decide whether they want to pay for this cost right now, and you are looking at a short-term benefit, or are they looking at it as a long-term benefit? So I think that's a call that the businesses have to make. I think, in terms of, how we know that, some of the, I mean, even because, in my role, I'm now managing and looking at sort of business and human rights and how companies are conducting human rights due diligence across Asia, many countries in Asia. And we see in the business and human rights discourse that some progress has been made, at least in the MNCs, big, large companies are conducting due diligence. But how do you really trickle it down to MSMEs and, really talk about value chains? I think both Garima and perhaps even Viraf sort of mentioned about the value chains and how even the NGRDCs focus mostly on that. I think the key thing here is that, when we ask businesses or the large multinational companies to conduct human rights due diligence, it's not just due diligence within their operations, right? It's also in their supply chains. What does that entail? It entails that the large companies are also providing, as they're setting up the codes of conduct and the compliance, mechanisms from their suppliers, they're also providing them support and building capacities of those suppliers, which largely are, particularly in Asia, are medium, small enterprises, right? So it's not just about, so it's a big responsibility of the brands as much to build capacity and to provide both technical, but also financial support. I mean, as I said, these things, these trainings, these workshops, setting up these standards are going to cost somebody, and why should suppliers always pay? And I think that's been a global, and that's been the discourse, why do all the companies, all the businesses from the global south, and this is really bringing the global south perspectives, why do we have to pay all the cost for, their supply chains to be cleaner? And, they get the advantages, and, the companies in the global north get to say that, we are clean, we are safe, but then are they equally paying the cost? So I think that's a big question, and I keep pushing that, particularly from the global south perspective. And I think the businesses need to sort of come together, and which we've seen in some ways actually in the garment sector, and therefore, one of the things is, can automobile sector here take some lessons and learning from how they have managed to get together the suppliers from the global south, from the garment industry, and are now demanding the brands to pay to address the purchasing practices. I think Dave was mentioning, this 0.5% margin. So I think it's also sort of takes back to the cost of purchasing practices. I think the second, in terms of the MSMEs, is also about, the government has to incentivize the small and medium enterprises. If the government, we have the national guidelines on responsible business conduct. I think Garima explained extensively about it. The Annex 2 actually is a guidance for MSMEs where, there are specific actions that the MSMEs can take. But are there any ways that we are also, in government policies, in government procurement, for example, or, any of the work that they're doing, can they in some ways incentivize MSMEs to adopt human rights principles and practices? How does that, so that, uh, they remain within a competitive edge in the market? And I think the third thing really is about the role of organizations, including, international organizations, UN agencies, and all of us, to also make sure that, we are really training and building capacities of small medium enterprises. I mean, I'll give you an example. We conduct so many trainings on human rights due diligence. We've trained over sort of 2,000 companies in the last couple of months within Asia. And we were looking at data, how many of these were really the MSMEs? And, when we start, going to a country office and say, let's start working with SMEs, and they come back and say, we have like millions of SMEs. If you're going to train only 15, it's not enough. And then that's where we stop. So I think that I'm going to take that responsibility also on ourselves, is, if we train 15, can these 15 then train further others? So I think it's also about, I'm bringing that responsibility also on us. And, we're going to reach out to you in terms of, can we design, train the trainers program where you've trained some, where you've built capacities of certain trainers, and they go and conduct these trainings and build capacities, and somebody eventually find, funds and resources, because I think that gives access to the larger market as well. So yeah, I think maybe, look at how the garment sector has brought together, particularly the accord and alliance that happened after Rana Plaza. I mean, we don't have to have a Rana Plaza to learn from that. And I think that's what we need to be careful about, that the likes of Rana Plaza do not happen. So can we get the brands to really come together and take equal responsibility and not push everything to the suppliers and the producers? Thank you.
Harpreet, thank you so much. That's a great perspective. And you're absolutely right that we don't need a Rana Plaza. We shouldn't need a Rana Plaza. On the other hand, we are publishing data on 1,000, 1,500 workers losing their fingers in India, just in 2-3 locations. And as Dhanraj said, they're probably 10,000 plus every year. And I'm pretty confident, I'll put my personal money on it, that there are more than 10,000 workers in auto sector losing their hands of money every year. We have a Rana Plaza, right? And I think your initiatives, your push on human rights due diligence is absolutely appropriate. It will take time. It will take phases. We are happy to support where you wish us to support as much as we can. And the point of this global north and south is a really relevant one. I think it's really important. I think that's the reality. We have to face it. At the same time, I think we are trying to be Atmanirbhar. We are trying to be Vishwaguru. If we have to lead the world, we cannot do without improving some of these things, right? So there are philosophical issues of concentration of wealth. We have the money to resolve these problems. It's not that we don't have the money. It's just getting concentrated in a few hands. So we're going there. So we are with you in pushing this agenda. And thank you so much, Harpreet, for joining us today and for sharing your thoughts.